Hey YouTubers, and welcome back to Tony the Technician's channel, and today we're going to be going into a coil spring compressor, or more specifically a suspension coil spring compressor. And if you guys follow my channel, you guys know I have an 85 Camaro, and we're going to be doing a lot of work to it. Well, some of those jobs being coilovers, caster camber plates, lower A-arms, new brake setup, and in order to do some of those jobs I need to remove the coil spring. I don't necessarily need the tool for the rear end, more specifically for the front end, but in our case we're going to remove the spring and leave it out, but this tool can be used to reinstall the coil spring as well, but we're just going to be removing it in a video coming up. I just want to do a quick look at the product and let you guys know some information. So there are a lot of different variations of coil spring compressors out there. All of them can be pretty shady or a little scary to use. Especially some people out there, they do some crazy things to try and compress some springs, but not a lot of people realize how dangerous that can be. You can lose your life messing around with that. There's a lot of pressure and tension on those springs, and if they come out, they're coming out fast. So I wanted to do this the safest way possible, so I did my research into finding the best compact portable spring compressor, while also looking for the safest one. There's a lot of different variations, like I stated before, so I've been looking for the safest one. This one seems to be, in my mind, the safest out of a lot of them. I don't like the two rods with the clamps on the top and bottom. Those can easily slide and move, and then you have to apply the same amount of pressure to each side. You don't want to bend the spring in a certain direction or anything like that. This one does it all in one, and it's fairly compact, and it's a good design, so I'm going to be sharing it with you guys. I also want to share just a little bit of knowledge as far as this brand compared to another, and this is a way you can save some money if you're looking for a spring compressor. But stay tuned for the future video where we will be removing all of these components and getting that coil spring out of there. Alright YouTubers, so this is the coil spring compressor that I went with. So this is going to be the one that I believe to be the best for my scenario. So there are a lot of different coil spring compressors out there. I'll be posting some pictures of some different styles. So also getting into that, this is going to be for on-vehicle coil spring compressing. There are many others that, let's say you have a McPherson strut assembly, those can be removed from the vehicle and the spring can be removed from the strut by other means of coil spring compressors, but these are going to be specifically ones that can be used on the vehicle, and the style that I have chose may not work for your situation. This is going to be good for a spring and shock assembly that are separate, where a McPherson or double wishbone or anything like that, this would not necessarily work for. There are many designs with the strut assembly. A strut is basically one that encloses a multiple pieces of the suspension in it, where the strut and the spring are most likely one component or connected together. I'll post a picture up in here so you guys can see that. But with my scenario, I have my shock that runs straight down to the A-arm, and then my coil spring is separate from it, so I can actually get this design through the coil spring, whereas if you have a strut assembly, this version will not work. Some others that I have posted will work if the clamping is done from the outside. It all just depends on your scenario, but if you're working on a third gen or anything where the shock and the spring are separate and you can get the tool up through the center of the spring, this is probably a little bit safer than some of those other coil spring compressors. So one thing I do want to note before we get to looking at this is OEM Tools sells the exact same one for around $50. This one is going to run around $35. I wasn't going to spend the other $15 in order to get the same tool, so that's why I went with the Auto Body Now brand, or ABN, and the part number being ABN 7566. It will be linked down in the description for you guys underneath tools that I suggest, or tools continued link. But looking at this, so you've seen this style where it's two rods and they have kind of little arms that sit on top and bottom that grab the spring from the outside and compress it, where you have to be very careful to adjust those a little bit at a time to compress the spring, and you never want to compress the spring to where the coils are actually touching each other. So the design I went with has this threaded rod, which I believe to be 11 inches. Then you have these washers down here that separate, and then you have these two arms up here that are offset, so you can grab, you know, the coil spring obviously spirals up so they grab evenly. You can place them so the coil spring compressor sits straight, and then you can adjust it here. And then there's this big fork, and this goes in the bottom. It has some teeth and grooves in it to sit on the bottom coil springs. You have some grooves back here as well. So you would feed this up from the bottom or the top, whatever your scenario is. In mine, I would go up from the top. I would hook these over the coil spring, and then once I have it set in there, I can adjust this rod to get me set correctly. And then I can go in here and I can slide this fork in underneath the other coil springs on the bottom, and then you just adjust this up, snug it up, and then you can use your impact or your socket and ratchet and slowly compress this, and it does it all evenly, and it doesn't kind of, you know, some of those other ones can really bring one side of the coil spring really tight. So like I said, you don't want to compress the coils to where they're touching, but you can compress it nice and evenly. So OEM Tools sells this exact same thing for $50. This one's $35. Snap-on has a USA made one for $300, and then there's a couple other brands that sell it as well. But for me here at home, this is the style that I need for my scenario. It's going to work well. In no sense is it really ever safe. There's always some danger to removing coil springs like this, but in my scenario I chose the safest one I believe for my scenario, as well as one that I know is still a good quality. I didn't want to go extremely cheap with them. That's why I went with this design. So these spring compressors can range anywhere, not just this design, but spring compressors in general can range anywhere from $20 up to, like the Snap-on one, being $300. And that's just for on-vehicle ones. The off-vehicle ones can be more because they come with a stand and such. So this, in my scenario, is going to be best for me. So stay tuned, where we will be putting this to use on the 3rd gen Camaro, where I'll be sliding this up through the A-arm over the spring, and then using the fork and compressing it. So we're going to be replacing my springs and shocks with a coil spring setup, as well as doing new tubular lower A-arms, as well as caster camber plates. So we got to get that spring out, and this, like I said multiple times before, this is best suited for my scenario. But hopefully I've posted up other pictures. You may not be able to use this for your scenario. Like I said, if you have a strut assembly, or maybe your A-arm doesn't allow anything up through the bottom of it, it all just depends on your scenario. You need to know what you're going to be working on in order to better select the coil spring compressor. But one thing you don't want to do is be one of those guys that uses ratchet straps or zip ties to try to compress their coil spring, because if that goes bad, not only could you damage the vehicle, but you could severely injure yourself, or possibly loss of life. Like, there is a lot of pressure on these springs, so you need to be very careful when removing them. Yes, it can be very dangerous. There's a lot of things on vehicles that can be very dangerous to work on. It's just being smart, not rushing, and actually thinking about what's best for your scenario. So this is, once again, the coil spring compressor that I will be using for the Camaro build in order to do the upgrades on it. So if there's any other information you guys would like on this, or if you would like my thoughts on some other coil spring compressors maybe you're thinking of for your situation, please feel free to drop it down in the comments. But other than that, if I forgot to mention anything, please feel free, ask questions down below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that thumbs up, leave a comment down below once again, and as always, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. I'll see you guys next time.